The Undertaker by Alexander Pushkin. The last remaining goods of the Undertaker, Adrian Prohoroff, were piled on the hearse, and the gaunt pair, for the fourth time, dragged the vehicle along from the Basmanaya to the Nikitskaya, whither the Undertaker had flitted with all his household. Closing the shop, he nailed to the gates an announcement that the house was to be sold or let, and then started on foot for his new abode. Approaching the small yellow house which had long attracted his fancy and which he at last bought at a high price, the old Undertaker was surprised to find that his heart did not rejoice. Crossing the strange threshold, he found disorder inside his new abode, and sighed for the decrepit hovel, where for 18 years everything had been kept in the most perfect order. He began scolding both his daughters and the servant for being so slow, and proceeded to help them himself. Order was speedily established. The case with the holy pictures, the cupboard with the crockery, the table, sofa, and bedstead took up their appropriate corners in the back room. In the kitchen and parlor was placed the master's stock in trade, that is to say, coffins of every color and of all sizes, likewise wardrobes containing mourning hats, mantles, and funeral torches. Over the gate hung a signboard representing a corpulent Cupid holding a reversed torch in his hand, with the following inscription: "Here coffins are sold, covered, plain, or painted. They are also let out on hire, and old ones are repaired." The daughters had retired to their own room. Adrian went over his residence, sat down by the window, and ordered the samovar to be got ready. The enlightened reader is aware that both Shakespeare and Walter Scott have represented their gravediggers as lively jocular people, for the sake, no doubt, of a strong contrast. But respect for truth prevents me from following their example. And I must confess that the disposition of our Undertaker corresponded closely with his melancholy trade. Adrian Prohoroff was usually pensive and gloomy. He only broke silence to scold his daughters when he found them idle, looking out of window at the passers-by, or asking too exorbitant prices for his products from those who had the misfortune, sometimes the pleasure, to require them. Sitting by the window drinking his 7th cup of tea, according to his custom, Adrian was wrapped in the saddest thoughts. He was thinking of the pouring rain, which a week before had met the funeral of a retired brigadier at the turnpike gate, causing many mantles to shrink and many hats to contract. He foresaw inevitable outlay, his existing supply of funeral apparel being in such a sad condition. But he hoped to make good the loss from the funeral of the old shopwoman, Tiruhina, who had been at the point of death for the last year. Tiruhina, however, was dying at Basgilai, and Prohoroff was afraid that her heirs, in spite of their promise to him, might be too lazy to send so far, preferring to strike a bargain with the nearest contractor. These reflections were interrupted unexpectedly by 3 Freemason knocks at the door. "Who is there?" inquired the Undertaker. The door opened and a man, in whom at a glance might be recognized a German artisan, entered the room, and with a cheery look approached the Undertaker. "Pardon me, my dear neighbor," he said, with the accent which even now we Russians never hear without a smile. "Pardon me for disturbing you. I wanted to make your acquaintance at once. I am a bootmaker. My name is Gottlieb Schultz. I live in the next street, in that little house opposite your windows. Tomorrow I celebrate my silver wedding. And I want you and your daughters to dine with me in a friendly way." The invitation was accepted. The Undertaker asked the bootmaker to sit down and have a cup of tea, and thanks to Gottlieb Schultz's frank disposition, they were soon talking in a friendly way. "How does your business get on?" inquired Adrian. Oh, replied Schultz. "One way and another I have no reason to complain, though of course my goods are not like yours. A living man can do without boots, but a corpse cannot do without a coffin." "Perfectly true," said Adrian. "Still, if a living man has nothing to buy boots with, he goes barefooted, whereas the destitute corpse gets his coffin sometimes for nothing." Their conversation continued in this style for some time, until at last the bootmaker rose and took leave of the Undertaker, repeating his invitation. Next day, punctually at 12 o'clock, the Undertaker and his daughters passed out at the gate of their newly bought house and proceeded to their neighbors. I do not intend to describe Adrian's Russian kaftan, nor the European dress of Akolina or Daria, contrary though this be to the custom of fiction writers of the present day. I don't, however, think it superfluous to mention that both maidens wore yellow bonnets and scarlet shoes, which they only did on great occasions. The bootmaker's small lodging was filled with guests, principally German artisans, their wives and assistants. Of Russian officials there was only one watchman, the Finn Yurko, who had managed, in spite of his humble position, to gain the special favor of his chief. He had also performed the functions of postman for about 25 years, serving truly and faithfully the people of Pogorelski. The fire which, in the year 1812, consumed the capital, burnt at the same time his humble sentry box. But no sooner had the enemy fled, when in its place appeared a small, new gray sentry box, with tiny white columns of Doric architecture, and Yurko resumed his patrol in front of it with battle axe on shoulder and in the civic armor of the police uniform. He was well known to the greater portion of the German residents near the Nikitsky gates, some of whom had occasionally even passed the night from Sunday until Monday in Yurko's box. Adrian promptly made friends with a man of whom, sooner or later, he might have need, and as the guests were just then going in to dinner they sat down together. Mr. and Mrs. Schultz and their daughter, the 17-year-old Lachin, while dining with their guests, attended to their wants and assisted the cook to wait upon them. Beer flowed. Yurko ate for 4, and Adrian did not fall short of him, though his daughters stood upon ceremony. The conversation, which was in German, grew louder every hour. Suddenly the host called for the attention of the company, and opening a pitch-covered bottle, exclaimed loudly in Russian, "The health of my good Louisa." The imitation champagne frothed. The host kissed tenderly the fresh face of his 40-year-old spouse, and the guests drank vociferously the health of good Louisa. "The health of my dear guests," cried the host, opening the second bottle. The guests thanked him and emptied their glasses. Then one toast followed another. The health of each guest was proposed separately. Then the health of Moscow and of about a dozen German towns. They drank the health of the guilds in general, and afterwards of each one separately. The health of the foremen and of the workmen. Adrian drank with a will and became so lively that he himself proposed some jocular toast. Suddenly one of the guests, a stout baker, raised his glass and exclaimed, "The health of our customers." This toast, like all the others, was drunk joyfully and unanimously. The guests nodded to each other, the tailor to the bootmaker to the tailor, the baker to them both, and all to the baker. Yurko, in the midst of this bowing, called out as he turned towards his neighbor, "Now then, my friend, drink to the health of your corpses." Everybody laughed except the Undertaker, who felt himself affronted and frowned. No one noticed this, and the guests went on drinking till the bells began to ring for evening service, when they all rose from the table. The party had broken up late and most of the guests were very hilarious. The stout baker with the bookbinder, whose face looked as if it were bound in red morocco, led Yurko by the arms to his sentry box, thus putting in practice the proverb, "One good turn deserves another." The Undertaker went home drunk and angry. "How, indeed," he exclaimed aloud, "is my trade worse than any other? Is an Undertaker own brother to the executioner? What have the infidels to laugh at? Is an Undertaker a hypocritical buffoon? I should have liked to invite them to a housewarming, to give them a grand spread, but no. That shall not be. I will ask my customers instead. My orthodox corpses." "What?" exclaimed the servant, who at that moment was taking off the Undertaker's boots. "What is that, sir, you are saying? Make the sign of the cross. Invite corpses to your housewarming." "How awful." "I will certainly invite them," persisted Adrian, "and not later than for tomorrow. Honor me, my benefactors, with your company tomorrow evening at a feast. I will offer you what God has given me." With these words the Undertaker retired to bed, and was soon snoring. It was still dark when Adrian awoke. The shopkeeper, Triahina, had died in the night, and her steward had sent a special messenger on horseback to inform Adrian of the fact. The Undertaker gave him a grivennik, a silver 4-penny bit, for his trouble, to buy vodka with. Dressed hurriedly, took an izvoshchik, and drove off to Razgulai. At the gate of the dead woman's house the police were already standing, and dealers in mourning goods were hovering around, like ravens who have scented a corpse. The defunct was lying in state on the table, yellow like wax, but not yet disfigured by decomposition. Here her in a crowd were relations, friends, and domestics. All the windows were open, wax tapers were burning, and the clergy were reading prayers. Adrian went up to the nephew, a young shopman in a fashionable surtout, and informed him that the coffin, tapers, pall, and the funeral paraphernalia in general would promptly arrive. The heir thanked him in an absent manner, saying that he would not bargain about the price, but leave it all to his conscience. The Undertaker, as usual, vowed that his charges should be moderate, exchanged significant glances with the steward, and left to make the necessary preparations. The whole day was spent in traveling from Razgulai to the Nikitsky Grates and back again. Towards evening everything was settled, and he started home on foot after discharging his hired izvoshchik. It was a moonlight night, and the Undertaker got safely to the Nikitsky Grates. At Yosnesinia he met our acquaintance Yurko, who, recognizing the Undertaker, wished him good night. It was late. The Undertaker was close to his house when he thought he saw someone approach the gates, open the wicket, and go in. "What does it mean?" thought Adrian. "Who can be wanting me again? Is it a burglar, or can my foolish girls have lovers coming after them?" There is no telling, and the Undertaker was on the point of calling his friend Yurko to his assistance, when someone else came up to the wicket and was about to enter. But seeing the master of the house run towards him, he stopped, and took off his three-cornered hat. His face seemed familiar to Adrian, but in his hurry he had not been able to see it properly. "You want me," said Adrian, out of breath. "Walk in, if you please." "Don't stand on ceremony, my friend," replied the other, in a hollow voice. "Go first, and show your guest the way." Adrian had no time to waste on formality. The gate was open, and he went up to the steps, followed by the other. Adrian heard people walking about in his rooms. What the devil is this, he wondered, and he hastened to see. But now his legs seemed to be giving way. The room was full of corpses. The moon, shining through the windows, lit up their yellow and blue faces, sunken mouths, dim, half-closed eyes, and protruding noses. To his horror, Adrian recognized in them people he had buried, and in the guest who came in with him, the brigadier who had been interred during a pouring rain. They all, ladies and gentlemen, surrounded the Undertaker, bowing and greeting him affably, except one poor fellow lately buried gratis, who, ashamed of his rags, kept at a distance in a corner of the room. The others were all decently clad, the female corpses in caps and ribbons, the soldiers and officials in their uniforms, but with unshaven beards, and the tradespeople in their best caftans. "Prohoroff," said the brigadier, "speaking on behalf of all the company, we have all risen to profit by your invitation. Only those have stopped at home who were quite unable to do otherwise, who have crumbled away and have nothing left but bare bones. Even among those there was one who could not resist, he wanted so much to come." At this moment a diminutive skeleton pushed his way through the crowd and approached Adrian. His death's head grinned affably at the Undertaker. Shreds of green and red cloth and of rotten linen hung on him as on a pole, while the bones of his feet clattered inside his heavy boots like pestles and mortars. "You do not recognize me, Prohoroff," said the skeleton. "Don't you remember the retired sergeant in the Guards, Peter Petrovich Kurulkin, him to whom you in the year 1799 sold your first coffin, and of deal instead of oak?" With these words the corpse stretched out his long arms to embrace him. But Adrian, collecting his strength, shrieked and pushed him away. Peter Petrovich staggered, fell over, and crumbled to pieces. There was a murmur of indignation among the company of corpses. All stood up for the honor of their companion, threatening and abusing Adrian till the poor man, deafened by their shrieks and quite overcome, lost his senses and fell unconscious among the bones of the retired sergeant of the guard. The sun had been shining for some time upon the bed on which the Undertaker lay, when he at last opened his eyes and saw the servant lighting the samovar. With horror he recalled all the incidents of the previous day. Tryachin, the brigadier, and the sergeant, Kurulkin, passed dimly before his imagination. He waited in silence for the servant to speak and tell him what had occurred during the night. "How you have slept, Adrian Prohorovich," said Aksima, handing him his dressing gown. "Your neighbor the tailor called, also the watchman, to say that today was Turco's namesday. But you were so fast asleep that we did not disturb you. Did anyone come from the late Trihina?" "The late? Is she dead, then? What a fool! Didn't you help me yesterday to make arrangements for her funeral?" "Oh, my batushka! Little father, are you mad, or are you still suffering from last night's drink? You were feasting all day at the Germans, you came home drunk, threw yourself on the bed, and have slept till now when the bells have stopped ringing for Mass." "Really?" exclaimed the Undertaker, delighted at the explanation. "Of course," replied the servant. "Well, if that is the case, let us have tea quickly, and call my daughters."